Welcome to the HC Leadership Podcast, forged in fire, led with purpose, formerly known as the Heat of Command. We're here to explore what it takes to lead courageously authentic. From the fireground, battlefield, ballfield, classroom, or boardroom, we bring you real conversations to inspire, challenge, and drive change. Here are your hosts, Kyle Matusik and me, Kerry Henderson. Welcome back to another episode of HC Leadership Podcast. And we hope you tuned in last week. We really got into a great kind of debate about culture and what we thought culture meant and how to establish it and how to create it. And we talked some about accountability in culture. And I really feel like in culture, part of culture is what you allow in your organization as acceptable. And so today, I'm really, really excited about the idea Kyle had in talking about empathy. And we talk a ton about empathy on this podcast. I think almost every episode we bring up the word empathy and the importance of it and leading with compassion and empathy and being genuine. But there is a breaking point to that. And sometimes empathy can become toxic, and empathy becomes when you're not holding people accountable. And that's what we want to dive into today is where is that breaking point for empathy, and when does it become not acceptable and as a leader, and when is it too far? And I think it ties in really nicely with the last week's episode about culture and what you allow as acceptable and what you allow as standards and expectations. And really, like, do we take it too far sometimes? Do leaders take empathy too far sometimes? And it is such an important strength. And do you get trapped in this idea of good intentions? Do you get trapped in this idea of I have to give grace and I have to give empathy, but instead I stop holding the line of standards. So that's what we want to talk about today.
Yeah, I think we both recently have read about, toxic empathy or how too much empathy or over and above can create a toxic culture or toxic environment. And it was very interesting to me and intriguing because, we've talked quite a bit on emotional intelligence and empathy and compassion and sympathy for people, which I think are valuable and necessary traits of leaders to have. However, just like with everything, there's a balance, and can we go too far? And sometimes, if we see certain weaknesses in ourselves, we tend to swing the pendulum too far the other way. And, empathy has become this driving force over the last few years of, we've seen it in a lot of leadership stuff and just as a culture and society, have more empathy for people. And it's like, have we started to swing that pendulum too far one way? And in some instances, if you look around you, you can start, and hopefully through some of the points we bring up, you can see how that's starting to happen. When we look at compassion, that's what drives accountability because it's through understanding. But toxic empathy avoids accountability out of fear of discomfort. And I just love that because, if we just go overboard on that empathetic thing and try to put ourselves in everybody's shoes about everything, and we just accept everything as is and don't want to confront things, now we're leading on an area from fear because, whether we don't want to hurt feelings or we don't want to approach the truth dead on right in its face or the reality or all these things. And so then we start avoiding accountability, and over time that can create a toxic culture. And in turn, you're not getting the results out of the people. You're not getting the results out of the processes of what you're doing in your organizations and or business. We're worried about feelings over growth of our organizations and our people. And it starts to become this thing that we thought was good. And then we took it too far and now it is hurting us. And I think the scary thing, anytime we try to do a drastic change, when you take a character flaw, it's always that balance of being checked. So we don't bring what we're trying to fix, we don't swing that pendulum too far. Because when you do, we usually don't notice it until it's too late. Like we've already been operating in that realm of toxic empathy or whatever trait that you swung too far away. and then it's too late. And now it's like playing back. We got to back up and we got to backtrack and we got to start implementing strategies to where we understand the balance of what empathy is and how it's needed in leadership, but when too much is too much. And I think we are getting there more often than not in our current in our current world, and I think it's just our world has brought us to this point in many aspects. And I think it's just very interesting. It's a very interesting topic to discuss because it really got me to think on not just toxic empathy, but how that pendulum can swing too far in so many things. But that empathy piece is just something that we have talked about and so many people are talking about. I felt like this was the one that needs to be like, we need to check this. And every organization, like if you're doing empathy and sympathy and you have compassion for your people, cool, good on you. But now it's time to check yourself and check your processes to see, are we going too far?
Yeah. And, I think this is where it comes in, where you and I have talked about when people say, does this make the fire service soft? I think this is the repercussions of that
Hmm.
because, you're trying to establish a good culture and you're trying to establish this culture of empathy and compassion. And then that's all with good intention. So
Yeah.
the road to a broken culture is paved with good
Yep.
intentions, but there was no checks and balances to that. So I feel like there is this, what is the difference between and where is the line between empathy and enabling? So I understand what you're dealing with is empathy. I lower the standard because of it as enabling. So, an example for anyone in leadership that's easy to kind of plug in here is you have an employee that's late. You want to know why they're late. Maybe they've not always been late, but now they're perpetually late. They got family stuff going on, you know, newly single parent, aging parent at home they're taking care of, difficulty transporting kids, no transportation, whatever it is, so they're late, right? We're empathetic to that. Like, I understand what you're dealing with, and how can I help you? Like, what support mechanisms can I put in place? But if you're enabling it, you're not holding a standard. So eventually other employees, you're eventually becoming non-empathetic to your other employees because you're enabling that. That sounds cruel because everyone goes through stuff, but eventually you have to say this is affecting your coworkers are having to being held they're being held over. They can't leave work until you're here. For nurses, doctors, paramedics, firefighters, police officers, anybody on shift work, anyone that's got a relief in place for shift work, they can't leave. Or teachers, you're picking up the slack of, teachers that are late or whatever it is, or can't do bus duty in the evenings, coworkers that aren't able to show up and meet the demand of sales. Everyone's picking up that slack. And so in your mind as a leader, you're being very empathetic because you're letting them slide, but you're not being empathetic to the other people you're also responsible for. So it's an interesting conundrum we end up in as leaders. And how do we how do we show empathy without enabling and without lowering standards?
Yeah, I think easily said, easily spoken in these words of what you just said. Leadership isn't therapy. And, I think and this is a lesson for beyond the fire service that I think we can teach every organization out there. Mental health became a big issue in our industry probably 10 years ago. It started becoming the buzzword and still is today. And I have my personal feelings on how it's going and stuff, but they started instituting some programs. Some are effective, some are not. And one of them, and again, I'm not here to debate peer support programs or the benefits or the pitfalls like that, but they instituted some of these peer support programs where firefighters help firefighters. And that could all of a sudden turn into leadership as therapy, and we start going down this road where we shouldn't be going down. Like, therapy is meant for the professionals. I know us as firefighters shouldn't be giving therapy to anybody. We're the ones that need it. So it's just kind of one of these things where we have to look at leadership as not therapy, but we still can be empathetic to people, right? We can't heal everyone that we lead. We can't fix every problem that everybody has in in their personal lives. We can't heal that, and trying to will burn you out as a leader. So we have to just watch this approach. Like, we still have an employer type relationship, we still have a job to do. We still have a business to run. We still have profits to gain. Whatever the course of your industry is, we still have that to do. I can help you out as much as I can, but at the end of the day, there's still a job that needs to be done. And so we have to look at empathy as a tool for us as leaders, not as a strategy. It guides our perspective and not our decision making. And I think that's very important. Like, our decisions need to be rooted in the values that we always talk about values and how important that is, and your end goals of your organization on what you're trying to accomplish, or what you're trying to sell, or what you're trying to do, or what type of difference you're trying to make. Like, your eye is always on that, and decision making needs to be its own thing, and empathy should not be guiding your decision making, right? And healthy leaders know when to switch from listening to leading. And I think that's very important. Like, it's cool, like, as leaders, to get in tune with your people and have conversations about life and listening, and just have a regular conversation beyond, hey, how's it going today? Good, and moving on. And we could have those conversations, because that in and of itself could be it. And then it's like, all right, it's time to work. Let's go kick some butt and do the things that we're going to do. So it's like this balance of listening versus leading, what we're using as a tool and not a strategy, and understanding that we just can't heal everybody, and we can't fix everybody's personal problems, or, the areas they may be struggling in personally, but we definitely can be compassionate to that and still try to grow them in our profession and the things that they're trying to do on a professional level to keep the goals of the organization in mind.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, and I think good leaders really take so much of that personally, and it leads to guilt.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
I think that's when you get into trouble is, you're carrying this guilt of enforcing a standard, or upholding a standard, or trying to maintain to some consistency in someone that is a good person that's going through a hard time. It's like you just want to take all that from them. You want to basically enable them and take away all of that to make it easier for them, and so you don't have to hold them accountable while they're going through this tough thing, right? Because that's probably the hardest thing a leader has to deal with is I have to hold someone accountable while they're experiencing some difficult thing. Like, I want to be an empathetic leader, but you also need to be empathetic to all the other people and the organization that you represent too, right? So it's not an individual thing. So I think when you stop holding people accountable, or if people around you can predict who you're going to hold accountable and who you're not going to hold accountable, I think you get into trouble there too. Like, if you're more empathetic, and I think we tend to be more empathetic to those who are going through something we've personally gone through.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You just have to be so careful, and that's why leadership is just such a tough road, because here we've preached at you for how many years?
Yeah.
Be empathetic,
Yeah.
but not too empathetic.
Yeah,
It's
hold
like
on a little bit.
Goldilocks and the three bears. Like, where is that balance? It's just so tough, but there is, that healthy empathy that still upholds a standard, and how you're communicating with people, and like how you're showing up for people. Like, I know things are tough, but here's the standard, and I'm going to hold everyone to it, including you. And I know things are tough, but what can I do to support you while it is tough? What things can we put in place for you to help you? Is that an extended leave of absence? So that we then can put someone else in your spot to meet your obligation, so everyone else isn't picking up the load. Or, what else is it that we can do and still hold the standard? That's where your culture gets set. And that's what we've talked about last episode. And this is really where your culture starts to really sink in.
Yeah, there's a quick little sidebar. Me and my buddy were having a conversation. We talk about all this leadership and how hard it is. And it's like, as I start looking at what's next for me, I was like, I could go be a garbage man and put my earbuds in and listen to podcasts and music all day. I don't have to deal with anything but myself and the garbage truck, and that's that. And, it just seems a lot easier on the surface. But when we look at, there were 2 points I wanted to hit on. You talked about accountability and then kind of circled back to the culture, and just to hit on both those, accountability is essentially empathy. And when we look at it, holding someone to a standard shows that you believe in their ability to rise to it. And sometimes we just have to, again, address it head on. And when we avoid accountability under this guise of empathy, it communicates to people you're too fragile to handle the truth. And they might not see that, but we have to understand that that's what's really going on. Where real empathy will say, I see your struggle and I still expect your best, even during that struggle. And again, that's different for everybody, and we can't sit here and go through every situation. But again, what we're talking about is the workplace and businesses, and we're trying to accomplish something. So we still need people's best, and we want to strive to get the best out of people. And sometimes we just have to still maintain that accountability, and we can't be fearful of having those conversations. And then when we look at the culture, when we look at empathy and when it becomes toxic, it could feel kind. But in turn, when we look at culture, it breeds chaos. When we look at going too far in terms of empathy, it tends to silence the hard truths, underperformance, the things you hit on, poor behavior and cultural drift of your organization. And that's not good. We don't need that. Teams end up confused because expectations are never enforced, and it just becomes a very confusing environment. And where we have to have this internal mindset as leaders that we want to help people grow and not, I don't want to hurt them. Because the truth of the matter is, if we want to help people grow, you might end up hurting their feelings, right? And because of the conversations that you're willing to have. Now, that doesn't mean you're not being empathetic to them. That means you might see something in them that you need to address. You see some potential that they might not see in themselves that's going to require a hard truth type of conversation. There might be a reality that is just misunderstood that you need to realign the ship and get people right on the right track again and be blunt about that. But the end goal is what you want to see the organization grow, and you want to see people grow. And to do that, we're not intentionally hurting people, but you are going to be crushing egos, which I think is a bonus to it all, and developing humility through the process. And it's just how we go around these conversations and have these conversations, but we just can't be fearful of it, because the opposite side of going too far is you're just going to create a toxic work environment at the end of the day. And if that's what you're trying to get out of, and then you're using empathy to get out of it, but then you take it too far, you're just it's like this full circle thing. Like all of a sudden you start implementing the empathy and things are going well, and then it goes too far and we're right back where we started. So, this comes full circle to a lot of things, like establishing a good team of people that you have around you to kind of have those checks and balances in everything that it is that you're trying to do and accomplish. So we don't go too far in these things, and we can sniff it out before it becomes a problem, I think is the most important part. But I think in our world today, in our society today, when you look at it, it's almost like we're already there, and it has become the norm. Like and it was beaten into us over the last 5-10 years. So we just heard it. We heard a lot of it in our industry, and I'm sure other industries. And we've talked about it a lot, and it's just over and over again. And it's like, then that you read this article or see these videos and it hits you smack in the face. Like, this is an issue we need to talk about, because I know it's happening in firehouses across the country. I know it's happening in the workplaces across the country. And I would bet that most don't even realize what's happening.
Yeah. And, one last thing I'd like to say about it is, if you are holding a high standard to begin with, and you're supporting people to meet that, you have high expectations, and you're already holding a pretty high standard, there's a little bit more room for this. And what I mean by that is, if you have a kind of mediocre standard on a day-to-day basis and your team operates in that space, and then you got to allow somebody to have some slack, there's no space for that. And so everyone else is scrambling to pick up the pieces for that. But if you have a pretty high standard all the time, and somebody needs a little space to take a step back, relax a little, you have more room to give that grace. But you just don't if you're just operating at neutral. You just don't have that space for it. So I think empathy comes early on, setting expectations in an empathetic way, very high expectations, and then you have some grace to give some empathy, but you just don't if you're just always kind of barely meeting standards. Carrie's personal opinion.
So when we look at all this stuff, and I think it's best to, like, how do we fix it or how do we prevent it? Becomes the issue or the remedy of, not going too far with empathy. And I think I like the word courageous before empathy because I think it takes a lot of courage. I think it's very hard to be empathetic in a work environment that requires a bold leader, a decisive leader. And I think courageous empathy, it looks like it's truth spoken with care, first and foremost. It balances compassion with conviction. And I think that's very important. We can be compassionate with people, but we also have to be convicting to people and motivating and empowering to them, even when those hard truths or those hard conversation comes. Because we have to look at what serves the person's growth, not just their comfort. And I think we are in a time where we just want everybody to be comfortable and we want to maintain the peace. And we don't want to open mouths and we don't want to stir the pot and we don't want to do these things. But those all come at a cost. Those come at a cost for you as a leader. They come at a cost for the organization. And if we keep our mindset on a person's growth, because I think that should, at the end of the day, if you're leading people, I don't care where you're leading them or what you're doing. I think your mindset, at least for me, and I don't know, you could say something else, is to see other people grow. Period. And it doesn't matter what environment you're doing that in, workplace, clubs, sports, whatever. You want to see people grow. And in order for people to grow, they are never going to grow in a circle of comfort. You always have to pull them out of their comfort zone. You have to take them out. You have to challenge them in new ways. You have to put things in front of them that they've never done before, that they're going to fail at, that, all these things. And so if we keep our mind on growth and really understanding what that takes to help people grow, uncomfortable conversations, hard truths, and not just their comfort, I think we could really start balancing this out a little bit and ensure that we don't go too far. But as a leader, are you willing to, and maybe you're not a leader yet or you're not in a leadership role, but are you even willing to do this stuff? Are you willing to have the hard conversations? Are you willing to speak the hard truths to people? Are you willing to challenge people and pull them out of their comfort zones? Are you willing to take yourself out of a comfort zone? And if you're not, maybe you're just not meant for a leadership role, and that's fine. That's okay. Not everybody's meant for this stuff. It is tough and it is challenging and it can be draining. So these are all the questions you have to ask. What's the main goal of being a leader? How am I going to balance all this stuff? Am I willing to have hard conversations with people where they might storm out of your office and not like you for a time? And are you willing to put the time and effort in to continue to grow, to make sure you're not, overstepping or going too far with some of the traits that are spoken in the leadership world of, try this or do that. So yeah, it's a very challenging thing, but there is a remedy for it. And it's a hard remedy. It's not easy to remedy this idea of toxic empathy because it takes a lot of courage on your side to speak the truth with care and not just be worried about people's comfort, but of their growth and what that entails.
Yeah, absolutely. And we get wrapped up into feeling guilty about the accountability and feeling guilty about reprimands, feeling guilty about saying hard things to people. And I think you start to take things very personal, and that's when you're that's happening for me. Why do I feel so guilty about this? It's I'm taking something too personal. I'm putting too much on me, like, but I'm responsible for a bunch of people. And if I am letting this person, get away or, not meet the expectations, that's okay for a short period of time while they're going through something. But eventually I have to hold them accountable because I'm responsible for all of these folks. And I'm not showing empathy to them if I'm not holding everyone equally accountable because you want people to know how you're going to show up, right? They need a very consistent me. They need a very consistent Carrie in the workplace and like, hey, she's going to give you some space and she's going to support you through it, but they need to know that you're equally going to toe the line, right? And this is a total sidebar, but this is what it made me think of because you were talking about, when you have to have hard conversations with people and hold people accountable and, you know, talk those hard things is, they used to teach us the shit sandwich method,
Yeah,
where you
yeah,
said
yeah.
you said something nice and then you said the hard thing and then you ended with something nice. Well, everyone knows that's coming now, so I
Right.
call it the shit sandwich method now. So I like to use the open face shit sandwich method where you just address it right away,
Yeah.
right? "Hey, Kyle, this is what I wanna talk to you about. I've seen these things, very objective. This is what I've seen. What can I do to help you with that? Let's work through this." But then end with something that's kind of positive, like, "Hey, I know we can work through this. If not, like, whatever." But I call it the open face shit sandwich method. I just wanted to plug that. I
I
I'm
like
I'm
it.
I'm coining that term.
You always know people who just got back from a class when they start doing, meetings like that, and you're like, "All right."
Yeah.
That goes back to authenticity, and that's just if you're doing that in this day and age, you're not authentic as a
Yeah, don't
leader.
start with, "You're doing really well in these
Yeah.
areas, and, hey, I love that." People see right through that. Just come right out with it.
Yeah. Yeah, as we sit here and talk and, all the things that we've hit on, it just go back to our episodes because we've had a conversation on hard conversations. We've talked about authenticity. We talked about culture. We've talked about empathy in the good parts of it, and take all those things and take all these little bits and apply them in different ways and see what works for you and your organization and the people that, work under you and all this stuff. Not all of it's going to work, but the biggest caution is, again, this was an idea that just came to my attention within the last 5 days, and I was like, we need to discuss this because this is, wow, it like hit me in the face. Like, yeah, you can go too far, and maybe I did, I don't know. And now it's like, okay, start checking myself and making sure that, you're willing and courageous enough to have the truth and honorable conversations. We still need to be respectful across the board. We're not saying lose any of that. But again, we have goals as organizations and we have to make sure we're meeting those goals and meeting our mission standards. And that's the most important part, right? I think, the biggest quote and the thing that I think of is we have to stop mistaking comfort for care and start leading with courageous empathy. I mean, that's it for me. I don't know.
Would you like to change our mission statement?
No, no, we're gonna no, we gotta keep that. I mean, it's
That was another good one. A tagline, if you will.
yeah, that's a good tagline. I do like that, but yeah,
Yeah. All right. Well, this was another therapeutic session for me.
always is, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's
So,
awesome.
well, we hope everyone is well and healthy and living your best life.
Oh yeah.
Until next week.
You've been listening to the HC Leadership Podcast. Leadership isn't rank or title, it's how you show up. So go look in the mirror. Are you leading with purpose today? Keep reflecting, keep leading. Until next time.